Jason Carter had always loved traveling alone. The idea of exploring new places, learning new cultures, and meeting strangers from different parts of the world excited him. This time, his journey had brought him to a country rich in history, with palaces that looked like they had stepped out of a storybook. Jason was not only traveling for sightseeing, he also wanted to experience the real life of the people who lived there. Far from the tourist guides and glossy brochures, he had read about the royal palace that dominated the city skyline, and he decided to make it the centerpiece of his adventure. On the morning of his visit, the sun had just started to rise, painting the streets with soft golden light. The air smelled of fresh bread and spices from the nearby market, and Jason felt a sense of calm he rarely experienced at home. Wearing simple clothes and carrying a small backpack, he walked through narrow streets lined with old stone buildings. His camera hung around his neck, ready to capture any unexpected scene. As he approached the palace gates, Jason noticed the large crowds of tourists being guided along strict paths, but he felt a curious pull toward a smaller, less crowded side entrance. Something about it promised a quieter, more personal experience. Jason's martial arts training had taught him to be aware of his surroundings. Every step he took was cautious yet confident. His black belt in multiple disciplines had not only made him strong but had also sharpened his instincts. As he walked along the less traveled path, he noticed guards patrolling the area. They were tall, stern, and moved with precision, their eyes scanning everyone who passed. Jason, being respectful and observant, kept a careful distance, hoping to enjoy the palace grounds without attracting attention. Despite his best efforts, curiosity got the better of him. A small door, slightly ajar, caught his attention, revealing a narrow staircase leading to an upper courtyard. The place looked abandoned, almost like a secret area meant for staff. Jason hesitated but decided to explore. He told himself it was only a quick peek, a chance to see something ordinary tourists would never see. He took a deep breath and stepped through the door. The stairs were steep and narrow, and his shoes made soft tapping sounds on the stone steps. At the top, he found a quiet courtyard, surrounded by high walls and intricately designed windows. The atmosphere was serene, almost magical, and Jason felt a thrill of excitement at discovering this hidden part of the palace. That's when he saw him, a royal guard, standing still and watching. The guard's expression was serious, and he held his stance with a discipline that Jason had seen only in military training videos. Jason froze for a moment, recognizing that he had crossed into a restricted area. He raised his hand slightly and took a careful step back, hoping to show he meant no harm. But in the very next moment, the guard moved toward him, his pace deliberate and commanding. Jason's heart started racing. He had trained for years in self-defense, sparring, and combat scenarios. But this was different. This was real life, with real consequences. The guard didn't say anything. His eyes were sharp, almost cold. Jason tried to explain himself, moving his hands in a calming gesture, but the guard seemed to misinterpret his intentions. One step closer, and the situation became tense. Jason could feel the energy in the courtyard shift, the air thick with anticipation. Instinct took over. Jason had learned that hesitation in dangerous situations could be costly. He made a quick decision to defend himself, but not to hurt the man unnecessarily. In a precise, controlled motion, he executed a defensive kick aimed to push the guard back and create space. The movement was smooth, practiced, and instinctive. The guard stumbled, caught off balance, and Jason took a step back, realizing what had just happened. For a moment, the courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Jason thought he had merely defended himself and that the situation might end there. But then reality hit. The guard quickly regained his footing, his expression no longer just serious but now marked with anger. He reached for a radio on his belt, speaking into it with urgency. Jason felt his stomach tighten as he realized that he had unintentionally escalated the situation. This was no longer about curiosity or exploration. It was now about rules, authority, and consequences he had not prepared for. Every instinct in his body screamed that he needed to stay calm. But the adrenaline made him hyper-aware of every sound, the echo of footsteps, the murmur of distant voices, the soft clatter of his own backpack. Jason tried to step back slowly, keeping his hands raised in a gesture of peace. He remembered the countless hours in the dojo where his instructors emphasized that martial arts was about discipline, respect, and awareness, not just fighting. Now, he was facing a true test of those lessons. The courtyard, which had moments ago felt like a secret paradise, now felt like a trap. High walls and locked gates surrounded him, and the guard's colleagues began appearing, their movements precise and coordinated. Cameras mounted in corners likely recorded every detail of his actions. Jason realized that his black belt had trained his body to react, but nothing had prepared him for the consequences of using that skill in a foreign country with strict royal protocols. He took a deep breath, trying to control the surge of adrenaline. His mind raced as he thought of the possible outcomes. He knew that panicking or making sudden moves could make things worse. The guard was experienced, well-trained, and backed by a system that Jason could not understand fully. He needed to rely not on his strength, but on his ability to stay calm, explain himself, and show respect. For a moment, Jason reflected on his journey, how he had traveled across oceans seeking adventure. Yet here, in a beautiful courtyard, he faced a challenge far more intimidating than any martial arts sparring match. As the guard approached again, Jason spoke softly, using gestures to communicate that he meant no harm. He felt a sense of humility wash over him, recognizing that sometimes, physical skill is meaningless without wisdom. Every second felt stretched, each heartbeat loud in his ears. He remembered his instructors saying that the true essence of martial arts is control not just of one's body, but of one's emotions. Now, those lessons were being tested in real life, in a way that no dojo, no tournament, and no sparring session could replicate. Jason noticed that the guard's colleagues were closing in, forming a subtle circle around him. He took another careful step back, careful not to make sudden movements. His mind raced for solutions, for ways to explain that it had been an accident, that he was simply curious and meant no harm. He realized that his adventure had turned into a delicate balance between survival and diplomacy. Every detail mattered: the tone of his voice, the expression on his face, the way he held his hands. He had to convey respect and humility, or the situation could spiral further out of control. In that tense courtyard, Jason felt a mix of fear, excitement, and clarity. Fear because the consequences could be serious. Excitement because this was a challenge unlike anything he had faced. Clarity because he understood that this moment was testing the very principles of discipline, respect, and control that he had trained his entire life to master. He reminded himself to breathe slowly, focus on the present, and trust in his ability to navigate a high-pressure situation. And so, Jason stood there, ready to face what came next, not with force, but with awareness, patience, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing that true strength is not always measured by the power of one's body, but by the control of one's mind. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a lesson that no black belt, no training manual, and no dojo could have prepared him for. Jason's heart was still racing from the kick that had sent the royal guard stumbling. At first, he had thought it was a simple defensive move, a split-second reaction that would end the confrontation. But now, as the guard regained his composure and called for backup, Jason realized how wrong he had been. This was no ordinary situation. He was in a foreign country, in a restricted area of a royal palace, and he had just physically engaged a member of the royal security team. The reality of his actions hit him like a sudden cold wave. Every instinct he had relied on in martial arts training felt insufficient against the weight of authority and tradition surrounding him. Guards began to appear from hidden corners of the courtyard. They moved with precision, their steps silent but purposeful. Jason noticed that they were not ordinary security personnel. They were highly trained, disciplined, and their expressions left no doubt that they took their duty seriously. Cameras and other surveillance devices seemed to track his every movement. Jason felt trapped, though he was still in the open air, and could have run if necessary. Yet, running would only make things worse. He remembered the countless lessons in his training. Self-control, awareness, and respect were more important than raw strength. He had to rely on these lessons now. As the courtyard filled with guards, Jason tried to remain calm. He lifted his hand slightly, palms visible, showing that he meant no harm. He spoke softly, choosing words carefully, though he wasn't sure if they would be understood. His accent was different, and his voice might have sounded foreign or confusing. Still, he tried. He explained that he hadn't intended to cause trouble, that it was an accident, and that he respected their authority. Each word felt like a small lifeline, a fragile attempt to bridge the growing gap between him and the guards. Despite his efforts, Jason realized that talking alone might not be enough. The guard he had kicked seemed particularly upset, his eyes sharp with a mix of anger and disbelief. It was clear that in this palace, protocol mattered more than explanations. Jason felt the first real pang of fear. He knew martial arts could help him protect his body, but here, he needed to protect his future, his freedom, and his dignity. The stakes were higher than any sparring match, any tournament, or any fight he had faced before. As minutes passed, the situation began to attract attention from nearby palace staff. Messengers and attendants whispered to one another, glancing toward the courtyard. Jason noticed that everyone seemed tense, as if expecting an incident to erupt at any moment. He remembered that in martial arts, staying calm in the midst of chaos was key. He focused on his breathing, counting slowly in his mind, trying to steady his racing heartbeat. His body had reacted quickly in the moment of the kick, but now he realized he needed his mind to react faster than his reflexes ever could. A senior officer finally appeared, walking into the courtyard with a presence that commanded silence. His uniform was adorned with symbols Jason didn't recognize, but the authority was unmistakable. The officer spoke to the guards, and Jason could tell from their immediate response that this was someone of high rank. The officer's gaze shifted to him, steady and evaluating. Jason felt a shiver run down his spine. He was alone. A foreigner in a palace full of history, tradition, and power. Facing consequences he could not anticipate, Jason tried again to communicate. He bowed slightly, not as a gesture of fear, but as a sign of respect, a principle he had learned in martial arts. That respect should precede confrontation. He gestured toward the door he had entered, indicating that he had wandered unintentionally. He hoped that showing honesty and humility would help, but he could sense that words were only a small part of what mattered here. The officer's expression remained unreadable, and Jason realized that he had entered a world where actions mattered more than explanations. Time seemed to stretch. Jason could feel the eyes of multiple guards and staff upon him. He noticed every detail: the polished stones of the courtyard, the intricate carvings on the palace walls, the soft clatter of armor as the guards shifted their weight. He felt the tension in the air as thick as fog. Despite the fear and uncertainty, Jason reminded himself to remain composed. Every martial arts lesson he had learned emphasized focus, even under extreme pressure. Now, he had to apply that focus to a situation that involved no fighting, only survival through composure and patience. As he stood there, Jason began to reflect on the events that had led him here. Just moments ago, he had felt excitement, curiosity, and even pride in discovering the hidden courtyard. Now, he faced the real consequences of a simple action. The kick that had seemed like a reflex had turned into a matter of protocol, law, and respect. He realized that in life, unlike in the dojo, even a perfect move could have unintended results. His thoughts raced as he weighed each possibility, considering what might happen next and how he could act to avoid escalation. The senior officer finally approached Jason and spoke in a language he could barely understand. Jason listened carefully, trying to catch familiar words, nodding respectfully whenever appropriate. Though he could not understand everything, the tone and body language were clear this was a serious matter. Jason's stomach twisted as he realized that what seemed like a minor mistake could now have serious repercussions. The realization forced him to think beyond martial arts, beyond reflexes, and beyond instinct. He needed patience, diplomacy, and the ability to think several steps ahead. Jason tried to make himself understood. He spoke slowly, choosing words that were simple and clear. He gestured with his hands, showing that he meant no harm, and that he wished only to cooperate. Slowly, he noticed a small change. The officer's expression softened just slightly. Perhaps the officer recognized that Jason's actions were not malicious. Perhaps the officer could see honesty and respect in Jason's demeanor. It was a small victory. But in a tense situation, even small victories mattered. As the discussion continued, Jason began to feel a sense of clarity amid the chaos. He realized that the skills he had honed in martial arts discipline, focus, awareness, and patience were now his greatest assets. He could not fight his way out of this situation, but he could navigate it with his mind. Every gesture, every word, and every movement counted. He felt the weight of responsibility not just for himself, but for representing his culture and his country as a respectful visitor. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Jason remained calm, focused, and patient, even as the guards maintained their watchful presence. He understood that rushing, panicking, or showing frustration would only worsen the situation. He thought back to his training, remembering the countless hours spent practicing calmness under pressure. Now, he realized that the true test of his abilities was not in combat, but in maintaining composure and respect in the face of authority. Finally, the officer signaled for Jason to follow him. Jason obeyed, walking carefully, hands visible, and showing no signs of aggression. He realized that he was now part of a delicate process, a protocol designed to maintain order and respect within the palace. Though he had feared the worst, he also began to feel a quiet sense of determination. This was a challenge unlike any other he had faced, and he knew that how he handled it would define the outcome far more than the kick itself ever could. As they moved through the palace corridors, Jason's mind remained alert. He noticed the architecture, the history, and the subtle cues in the behavior of the guards. He realized that every detail mattered. In martial arts, awareness of an opponent's movements could mean the difference between success and failure. Here, awareness of the environment, the people, and the rules could mean the difference between freedom and serious trouble. Jason felt a mixture of fear, respect, and determination as he followed the officer deeper into the palace, ready to face whatever came next. Even as he walked, he reflected on the lessons he had already learned. Strength is not only physical, and discipline is not only for fighting. Real strength comes from patience, composure, and respect. Real discipline comes from knowing when to act and when to wait. Jason had entered the courtyard seeking adventure, but he was now experiencing a deeper, more intense form of growth, one that no dojo or sparring match could ever teach. Jason Carter walked carefully through the long, polished corridors of the palace. His hands still raised slightly, showing respect. The walls were covered with intricate carvings and golden frames that seemed to tell stories of kings and queens from centuries past. Every step echoed softly, reminding him of the authority and history surrounding him. Though his heart still raced from the incident in the courtyard, he focused on maintaining calm, reminding himself that this was no longer about physical skill. This was about patience, awareness, and understanding the world he had stepped into. The senior officer led Jason into a large room, filled with other officials. Their faces were serious, and they communicated quietly among themselves before turning their attention to him. Jason realized that he was now part of a formal procedure he barely understood. Each movement, each glance, seemed loaded with significance. The air in the room felt heavier, as if the walls themselves carried centuries of tradition. Jason knew that making a single wrong gesture could escalate the situation further. As he stood there, Jason tried to make sense of what was happening. The officials spoke in a language he did not understand fully, though some words sounded familiar. He listened intently, nodding respectfully when appropriate, hoping that his calm demeanor would convey his intentions even if his words failed. He remembered his training, where instructors had emphasized that communication was not just verbal. Body language, eye contact, and controlled movements were equally important. He straightened his posture, kept his movements slow and deliberate, and focused on projecting sincerity. One of the officials, an older man with a distinguished presence, approached Jason and spoke slowly, clearly choosing his words with care. Jason strained to understand, picking up a few words here and there, and realized that the man wanted to know exactly why he had entered the restricted area. Jason took a deep breath and began explaining, using simple words, gestures, and a calm tone. He described his curiosity, his desire to see parts of the palace that most tourists could not, and emphasized that he had no intention of causing harm. His words were accompanied by gentle gestures, pointing toward the courtyard where the incident had occurred, and then toward himself in a humble bow. The officials listened closely. Jason could see subtle changes in their expressions, some showing skepticism, others hinting at understanding. He realized that honesty and humility were his best tools now. No amount of martial arts skill could help him here. He had to rely on respect, composure, and the ability to convey his intentions clearly without offending anyone. Every word he spoke, every movement he made, mattered more than any kick, punch, or defensive maneuver he had ever learned. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Jason's mind raced with possibilities. What if they did not believe him? What if the situation escalated into something serious? He reminded himself that panic would serve no purpose. In martial arts, controlling fear and channeling energy constructively was key to success. He applied that lesson now, focusing on his breathing, staying calm, and showing respect. Even as his heart beat quickly, he kept his voice steady and his gestures deliberate. At one point, one of the officials asked Jason to demonstrate that he meant no harm. Though he was initially unsure, he realized that this was an opportunity to show restraint and composure rather than physical ability. Jason carefully stepped back, raised his hands in an open, non-threatening manner, and bowed slightly. He made no sudden movements, showing that he could control his body and his instincts. The officials seemed to notice, their expressions softening slightly. Jason understood that this was a small but important victory. Respect and control could speak louder than words or actions in a tense situation. As the conversation continued, Jason learned more about the palace's rules and the importance of protocol. He realized that even minor mistakes could be taken seriously, especially in restricted areas. What had seemed like an adventurous detour into a quiet courtyard was now a situation with serious implications. Jason felt the weight of his actions, but also a sense of determination. He understood that he needed to navigate this carefully, with patience, respect, and humility. Every decision he made could influence the outcome. The senior officer asked Jason to remain seated while they discussed his situation. Jason complied, sitting on a simple wooden chair, his posture straight, his hands resting calmly in his lap. He observed the room carefully, noting every detail: the positions of the officials, the expressions on their faces, the way they communicated with one another. He realized that this was another form of training, one that required observation, awareness, and mental agility rather than physical strength. He focused on staying alert and ready to respond appropriately to any questions or instructions. Hours passed, and Jason remained patient. He remembered the countless times he had trained in martial arts, learning that discipline extended beyond physical skills. True mastery involved patience, humility, and the ability to stay composed under pressure. He applied these principles now, using calmness and respect to navigate a situation that could have escalated at any moment. He realized that the real test of his abilities was not in fighting but in understanding, adapting, and responding with wisdom. As the discussion progressed, the officials began to ask Jason about his background, his travels, and his intentions. He answered honestly, sharing his love for learning about different cultures and his desire to explore historical sites respectfully. He emphasized that he had no intention of breaking rules or disrespecting the palace. His sincerity seemed to resonate, and he noticed subtle signs of approval from some of the officials. They began to see him not as a threat, but as a visitor who had made an honest mistake. Jason reflected on the lessons he had learned so far. Curiosity and adventure were important, but so were respect, patience, and awareness. His martial arts training had taught him to remain calm under pressure. But now he understood that the true application of these lessons extended far beyond the dojo. In life, challenges often come in unexpected forms, and the ability to navigate them with composure and wisdom was far more valuable than raw physical skill. Eventually, the senior officer approached Jason again, speaking in a calm, measured tone. Though Jason could not understand every word, he sensed that the conversation was moving toward resolution. The tension in the room seemed to ease slightly, and Jason felt a small sense of relief. He knew that his patience, honesty, and respect had played a role in de-escalating the situation. He realized that sometimes, the greatest victories are not fought with strength or skill, but with understanding, empathy, and composure. As the meeting concluded, Jason was escorted back through the palace corridors, his movements slow and deliberate. He remained aware of his surroundings, noting the positions of the guards and the behavior of the officials. He understood that while the immediate danger had lessened, the experience had left a lasting impression. He had learned that navigating unfamiliar environments required more than courage. It required awareness, respect, and the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected circumstances. By the time Jason was allowed to leave the room, he felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and reflection. The palace staff had treated him with fairness, but he knew that his actions had consequences that extended beyond the moment. He realized that his martial arts training had prepared him for physical challenges, but this experience had tested his mental strength, patience, and ability to navigate complex social situations. He felt a new sense of maturity, understanding that true mastery involves not only controlling the body, but also understanding the world and the people in it. As he walked back toward the courtyard where the incident had occurred, Jason reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had set out seeking adventure and discovery, and while he had found excitement, he had also encountered a powerful lesson in humility, respect, and patience. He knew that the experience would stay with him for life, shaping not only how he approached travel and exploration, but also how he applied the principles of martial arts to everyday challenges. Jason left the palace with a renewed sense of purpose. He understood that real-life challenges often require skills far beyond what one can learn in a dojo. Strength and agility are valuable, but composure, respect, and awareness can be even more powerful. He had faced a situation that no training could have fully prepared him for, yet he had navigated it successfully by applying the deeper lessons of discipline and humility. And though he could not have anticipated the events of that day, Jason felt a quiet pride in how he had handled them. He had learned that true strength is measured not only by what one can do physically, but by how one responds to unexpected challenges, respects others, and maintains control in moments of uncertainty. The palace, the guards, and the tense hours he had spent inside had become a powerful teacher, one that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Jason Carter had never imagined that a simple visit to a palace would turn into such a high-stakes experience. After being escorted through the corridors and questioned by the officials, he felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because he had not been punished harshly, and anxiety because he knew the situation was far from over. He had been taught in martial arts that every moment of tension is an opportunity to test oneself. And now, he faced a different kind of test, one that required patience, understanding, and emotional control. The officers began to discuss his case quietly among themselves. Jason could only watch, sensing the seriousness of their deliberations. His heart beat steadily, but inside, he was fully aware that he was at the mercy of rules and traditions he barely understood. He realized that while martial arts had prepared him to face physical challenges, this situation demanded a deeper form of discipline, the ability to manage emotions, communicate effectively, and respond with humility. Every action he took now could determine whether he would leave the palace freely or face serious consequences. Jason reflected on the lessons he had learned during his years of training. Martial arts had always emphasized respect for others, patience in the face of provocation, and control over one's own reactions. These lessons suddenly felt more important than any technique he had ever mastered. He understood that the same principles applied, not only in a dojo or during a sparring match, but also in real life, where every decision carried weight and consequences. He reminded himself to stay calm, to breathe steadily, and to show genuine respect in every gesture. Hours passed slowly, and Jason remained seated, observing everything around him. The room was filled with the quiet hum of conversation among the officials, punctuated by occasional notes being written and gestures exchanged. Jason noticed the subtle way they communicated, sometimes through eye contact, sometimes through small nods. He realized that understanding their unspoken cues could be just as important as responding to their spoken words. Every subtle signal offered insight into their thoughts and intentions, and Jason knew he had to pay careful attention to navigate the situation successfully. Finally, one of the senior officials turned to Jason and spoke. Though he could not understand every word, the tone was deliberate and calm. Jason focused on his body language, nodding respectfully and maintaining eye contact. He sensed that this was an opportunity to demonstrate sincerity and humility. Slowly, he began to explain his actions again, emphasizing that he had not intended any disrespect and that his entry into the restricted area had been accidental. He spoke slowly, clearly, and deliberately, ensuring that his gestures matched his words. The officials listened closely, and Jason noticed small changes in their demeanor. Some nodded slightly. Others exchanged brief looks of approval. He realized that honesty, respect, and composure were beginning to work in his favor. It was not about proving his skill or strength. It was about demonstrating that he understood the situation, recognized the importance of their rules, and was willing to accept responsibility for his actions. He began to feel a quiet sense of hope. As the discussion continued, Jason reflected on the importance of humility. In martial arts, humility is often emphasized as a key trait, understanding one's strengths and limitations, respecting others, and avoiding unnecessary conflict. Now, he understood that humility was not only a principle but a practical tool for navigating life's challenges. By showing respect to the officials and acknowledging the situation, he was able to begin turning a tense confrontation into a conversation built on mutual understanding. The officials asked Jason to remain calm and cooperative while they reviewed the situation further. He complied, sitting quietly and observing their interactions. Every movement he made was measured, deliberate, and respectful. He realized that even small gestures, such as how he held his hands or the way he shifted in his seat, could convey messages about his character. He focused on maintaining composure, drawing on years of training to stay calm despite the uncertainty. Time seemed to stretch, but Jason remained patient. He thought about how martial arts had prepared him for intense physical challenges. But now he saw that true mastery extended beyond the body. Mental strength, emotional control, and the ability to remain composed under pressure were equally, if not more, important. He reflected on past experiences where he had relied solely on physical skill, and he understood that those lessons were only part of what made him capable. Life often demanded adaptability, awareness, and the ability to navigate complex social situations, skills that were being tested now. Eventually, one of the officials approached him with a gentle nod. Jason interpreted this as an invitation to speak further, or at least to provide additional explanations. He continued to communicate with care, using clear words and respectful gestures. He emphasized his respect for the palace, the guards, and the traditions of the country. He expressed sincere regret for any misunderstanding and reassured them that he would never intentionally break any rules. Every word was chosen carefully, and every gesture was deliberate, reflecting the lessons of discipline and control he had learned over years of martial arts practice. Slowly, the mood in the room began to shift. The officials' expressions softened, and the tension in the air decreased. Jason realized that his approach, patience, honesty, respect, and composure was having an effect. He had managed to transform a potentially hostile situation into one that could be resolved through understanding and dialogue. He understood that true strength was not measured by how hard he could strike, but by how wisely he could act when faced with unexpected challenges. As the discussion continued, Jason reflected on the journey that had brought him here. What had begun as a simple curiosity about a hidden courtyard had evolved into a profound lesson in humility, patience, and awareness. He recognized that life often presents unexpected challenges that cannot be solved with strength alone. Situations require careful observation, respect for others, and the ability to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for the training and experiences that had prepared him to face such a challenge. Hours later, the senior officials made a final decision. Jason was allowed to leave the room, but the experience had left an indelible mark on him. He understood that he had been given a rare opportunity to test not only his composure and patience, but also his ability to navigate complex social and cultural dynamics. The lesson was clear. Martial arts had trained his body, but life had tested his mind, heart, and character in ways no dojo ever could. As he walked back through the corridors, Jason reflected on what he had learned. Strength without humility can be dangerous. Skill without patience can lead to trouble. Courage without respect can result in unnecessary conflict. He realized that his experience in the palace was a powerful reminder that life often tests the principles we take for granted, and that true mastery comes from applying those principles in real-world situations. By the time Jason reached the courtyard where the incident had occurred, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had faced a situation that no training manual or sparring session could have fully prepared him for. He had remained calm, respectful, and composed, and in doing so, had turned a tense and potentially dangerous encounter into an opportunity for growth and understanding. He understood that this experience would stay with him for life, shaping the way he approached challenges, people, and unexpected situations in the future. As he stepped out into the sunlight, Jason felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons he had learned. The palace, the guards, and the officials had all been part of an experience that tested not only his physical abilities, but also his patience, humility, and awareness. He realized that every moment of tension, every challenge, and every unexpected turn in life offers an opportunity to grow stronger, not just in skill, but in character. Jason knew that he would carry this lesson with him forever. The kick that had started it all was just the beginning. The true test had been how he responded afterward. He understood that life often presents challenges that cannot be solved with force alone, and that the greatest victories come from composure, respect, and wisdom. As he left the palace behind, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be strong, disciplined, and resilient. Jason Carter stepped out of the palace gates, the sunlight warming his face and easing the tension that had gripped him for hours. The events of the day replayed in his mind, each moment vivid and intense. What had started as a casual curiosity, a desire to explore a hidden corner of a historical palace, had turned into a challenge that tested him in ways no martial arts training could ever have prepared him for. He felt a mixture of relief, gratitude, and deep reflection. He had survived, but more importantly, he had learned lessons that would stay with him forever. As he walked through the bustling streets, Jason began to process what had happened. He realized that martial arts had taught him more than just physical skill. Years of training had instilled discipline, patience, focus, and self-control. However, none of that could have prepared him fully for the complex interplay of authority, culture, and human behavior he had just experienced. In that palace, strength was not measured by the force of a kick or a punch, but by composure, respect, and wisdom. Jason felt humbled by the experience, recognizing that real-life challenges often demand more than what one can learn in a gym or dojo. He paused for a moment, leaning against a stone wall, and reflected on the critical moments of the encounter. The kick that had sent the royal guard stumbling had been instinctive, a reaction to a perceived threat. In any other situation, it would have been a simple defensive move, unremarkable, and even expected for someone with his training. But here, it had consequences far beyond the physical. Jason understood now that actions, no matter how small, could carry weight depending on the circumstances. He had been reminded that life, like martial arts, requires mindfulness and awareness at every step. The thought of the palace guards and officials stayed with him. Their expressions, movements, and decisions had all communicated lessons that no training manual could ever teach. Jason remembered the moment when the senior officer had approached him, calm but firm, assessing not only his words but his demeanor. It had been a turning point in the encounter. Jason realized that respect and sincerity were more powerful than any demonstration of skill. His ability to remain composed, even when faced with uncertainty and fear, had shifted the course of the situation in his favor. As he moved away from the palace, Jason noticed the people in the streets going about their daily lives. Some glanced at him curiously, while others were immersed in their routines. He thought about how life often presents unexpected challenges, and how these challenges test not only our abilities but also our character. The lessons from the palace were clear. Humility, patience, and respect were essential, not just in interactions with authority but in every aspect of life. Jason realized that the greatest victories come not from overpowering others, but from understanding, adapting, and responding wisely. Walking further, Jason reflected on the inner growth he had experienced that day. Martial arts had trained his body, but the palace experience had trained his mind and heart. He had been forced to confront fear, uncertainty, and the consequences of his actions in a way that no sparring session could replicate. He had learned that true strength lies not only in physical ability but also in the capacity to remain calm, thoughtful, and respectful under pressure. This realization was profound, and Jason felt a sense of quiet pride in how he had handled the situation. Jason's thoughts turned to the importance of empathy. During the encounter, he had tried to see the situation from the guards' perspective. They were tasked with protecting a palace of immense historical and cultural significance, and their vigilance was a reflection of that responsibility. By understanding their role and showing genuine respect, Jason was able to communicate more effectively, even without fully understanding their language. He recognized that empathy, patience, and careful observation were as critical to success as skill or strength. As the sun began to set, Jason found a quiet park and sat on a bench, allowing himself a moment to rest and reflect. The city around him hummed with life, and yet he felt a sense of calm after the chaos of the day. He thought about the adrenaline that had coursed through his body, the tension in the palace corridors, and the moments when he had questioned whether he could remain composed. Each challenge had taught him something new about himself, his abilities, and his capacity to navigate complex situations. Jason considered how he could share the lessons he had learned with others. Many people train in martial arts or other skills, but few have opportunities to test their abilities in real-life situations where consequences are high and rules are strict. He realized that his experience could serve as a story of growth, emphasizing that true mastery involves much more than physical prowess. It is about understanding, respect, patience, and the wisdom to act appropriately, even when the outcome is uncertain. Reflecting on the palace experience, Jason also thought about the importance of preparation. While no amount of training could have fully prepared him for the unexpected events, his martial arts background had given him essential tools: focus, discipline, and emotional control. These qualities allowed him to remain calm and make thoughtful decisions when fear and uncertainty could have easily overwhelmed him. Jason realized that preparation extends beyond physical training. It includes mental and emotional readiness for the unpredictable nature of life. As evening fell, Jason walked toward a quiet street cafe. Sitting down, he allowed himself to process everything fully. He thought about the palace, the guards, the officials, and the intricate balance between action and consequence. He understood that life often tests us in ways that are sudden, unexpected, and unavoidable. What mattered most was not the challenge itself but how one responded to it. His ability to remain composed, respectful, and mindful had transformed a potentially disastrous encounter into a valuable life lesson. Jason also reflected on gratitude. Despite the fear and tension, he was grateful for the experience. It had taught him lessons that could never be replicated in training. He was grateful for the officials who had allowed him to leave without punishment, recognizing that fairness and understanding can coexist even in strict systems. And he was grateful for his own discipline, which had enabled him to navigate the situation successfully. Gratitude, he realized, was an essential part of growth. It allows one to see value in even the most challenging experiences. The night grew darker, and Jason prepared to return to his lodging. He felt a sense of closure, knowing that he had faced a true test of character and emerged with wisdom and perspective. The palace incident, while frightening at the moment, had become a defining experience in his life. He had learned that true strength is not measured by what one can physically do, but by how one responds to challenges, treats others with respect, and maintains composure when the unexpected occurs. As he lay in bed that night, Jason thought about the journey ahead. He knew that life would continue to present unexpected challenges, and that each would require patience, humility, and awareness. The lessons from the palace were now part of him, guiding his thoughts, actions, and interactions. He understood that mastery is not only about skill but also about character, and that the most valuable lessons often come from real-life experiences rather than controlled environments. In the days and weeks that followed, Jason shared his story with friends, fellow travelers, and martial artists. He emphasized the importance of respect, composure, and awareness in every situation. He explained how the experience had tested his patience, humility, and ability to navigate authority, and how it had taught him that true mastery involves more than physical skill. People listened, captivated by his tale, and many reflected on how similar principles could apply in their own lives. Jason continued to travel, but with a new perspective. He approached each destination with curiosity, respect, and heightened awareness, understanding that every place, every person, and every situation offers lessons beyond what one can anticipate. He had learned that while adventure is valuable, so is mindfulness, and that the most memorable experiences often come from challenges that test one's character as much as one's skill. Looking back on the palace incident, Jason understood that it had been a turning point. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and authority, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the power of composure and respect. The kick that had sparked the encounter was only the beginning. The true lesson lay in what came after, in patience, humility, and understanding. Jason carried these lessons with him, not as a story of fear, but as a story of growth, resilience, and the importance of applying the principles of discipline in all areas of life. And though the palace would remain a memory, Jason knew that the lessons it had taught him would continue to guide him forever. He had learned that life's true tests often come without warning, and that the ability to respond with wisdom, composure, and respect is the greatest skill one can develop. The experience had transformed him, and he felt ready for whatever challenges awaited, confident that he could face them with the same balance of courage and humility that had carried him through that unforgettable day.